Bijumohan, the reason why such a substantial section of the media, in particular what we describe as the mainstream media, has become so subservient to the ruling dispensation is on account of a variety of factors. One section of the media is ideologically aligned with the ruling dispensation. Say, take for instance Mr. Rajat Sharma. As a student, he was a member of the Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad, the ABVP, which is aligned with the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. So he is ideologically with the RSS, and as you know, the RSS is the ideological parent of the Sangh Parivar, of which the Bharatiya Janata Party is its political arm or political wing. So that's one part of the story. There could be other journalists like Rajat who are ideologically aligned. There's one section of the media which is dependent on the government and government for advertising. You see that in various media organizations. They get government advertising. The union government, the government of India, is the biggest advertiser. State governments are also advertisers. But what you see is that the dependence on government advertising, and this has grown in recent years, especially in the last few years, so that makes these media organizations extremely uncritical of those who are in power, whether it be in New Delhi or in the state. So there is a saying in English, he who pays the piper calls the tune. So the piper, the flute player, can play for you Rag Yaman, but you are telling him, I'm paying you, so you play Ek Do Teen, Bara Tera. But there is a little more to it than this. All those who are in power, historically, in India and across the world, they are not tolerant towards their critics. It could be the political opposition, it could be journalists who ask difficult questions, but the levels of intolerance vary. Some are more intolerant, that means they are more tolerant, others are less intolerant or more tolerant. But one thing that distinguishes this particular government, the Bharatiya Janata Party led government headed by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, is that it is not just intolerant, it is vengeful. So those, you're not with us, you're against us. You don't support us, that means you're anti-national. You belong to the Tukre gang, you want the country to be divided. This is the mindset. So you see, the law enforcing agencies, like the Income Tax Department, like the Enforcement Directorate, like the Central Bureau of Investigation, like the NIA, the National Investigation Agencies, they have become weapons targeted at the government's critics, be they political opponents or media organizations and their representatives and journalists. The number of journalists who have died, who have been threatened, who have been harassed by lawsuits, defamation cases, by legal proceedings, lodging of first information reports, and plain simple threats have grown in the last 9.5 years that this government has been in power. The government doesn't want to acknowledge it, but this is true. And this is true especially in the BJP ruled states. People who ask questions are penalized. You ask a straight question. Journalists who show what's wrong with the working of the government, cases of corruption. I think this is a short-sighted policy, because if the media doesn't show the government where it's going wrong, how its policies and programs are not being properly implemented, I think it's bad for the government. But this government as I mentioned earlier, is not just intolerant, it is vengeful. That means, take the case of several cases. Take Dainik Jagran. It is one of the most widely circulated newspapers in the world. It's a Hindi newspaper. It has number of editions in northern India. In the middle of 2021, they published a series of reports about how bodies were floating in Mother Ganga, Ma Ganga. And before you knew it, the income tax department had visited their offices. See the case of NewsClick. The Enforcement Directorate, the Income Tax Department, the Economic Offences Wing of the Delhi Police, the Special Cell of the Delhi Police, they invoke the UAPA, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. The Central Bureau of Investigation, the CBI, has lodged a case pertaining to alleged violation of the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. Whether it be the Dainik Jagran, whether it be NewsClick, similar visits have been paid by authorities, government authorities of different kinds, to the offices of News Laundry, The Wire, among others.
BBC also.
Of course, the BBC is very much in the picture. And all of this indicates that this government is vengeful towards its critics. But let's take one more step forward. Because these media organizations have become excessively dependent on government advertising, journalists are told, if you criticize the government, you lose your job. What will happen to your wife? What will happen to your daughter's education? Will your home fires be burning? So, the fear of losing their jobs, and this is, you're seeing this happening not just in India, in different parts of the world, as the internet has grown, the so-called mainstream media, newspapers, television channels in India, radio is a different story because it's news on radio is totally controlled by the government. These organizations, they are being literally bludgeoned into submission. So if the journalist wants to keep her or his job, he just keeps quiet, even if you disagree. Look what happened. What were the circumstances that led to the departure of Avisar Sharma from ABP News, Milind Khandekar, Punyaprasun Bajpai? Why did Ravish Kumar not stay on in NDTV? Why has he set up his own YouTube channel? Okay, however popular you are on YouTube, how many viewers you get, how many subscribers you get, YouTube is a monopoly, a virtual monopoly. So Ravish Kumar doesn't know how much money YouTube is earning from his program. Out of 100 rupees that YouTube earns, how much does Ravish Kumar get? Is it 10 rupees or 20 rupees or 30 rupees or 40 rupees? Their algorithms are secret. So that ensures that their monopoly is preserved. The last point in this context, and this again we can talk about NDTV. Why did the companies controlled by Mr. Mukesh Ambani, one of India's richest men, he heads Reliance Industries Limited, which is India's largest privately owned corporate entity, through a very complicated, convoluted route, I think 13 or 14 years ago, he had invested a substantial amount of money, 400 crore rupees, gave it to the holding company that controls NDTV, which is a publicly listed company. That holding company is after the initials of its original promoters, Radhika Roy, Pranoy Roy, RRPR. It was an interest-free loan, roughly 400 crore rupees. They never asked for it back, right? If you put interest on that loan, it would have doubled or more than doubled in these 12 or 13 years. Why did Mr. Ambani, the Ambani, sell to Mr. Adani? Why? Dr. Pranoy Roy, his companies, their baby went away from them. They described it as a hostile takeover, then they gave up the fight. Why? Today, the Adani Group is not just controlling NDTV, it is also controlling other companies, most recently IANS, the Indo-Asian News Service, a news agency in which earlier the younger Ambani, Anil Ambani, had a stake, or his companies had a stake. then companies that were earlier controlled by Raghav Bayal's Quintillion Media, Mr. Ambani and Mr. Adani, they head two of the biggest corporate conglomerates in this country. And they are also the biggest owners of the media. So that explains to you why the media behaves in the way it does. So in Network 18, which is owned by the Ambanis, you cannot expect that and there will be any criticism of the Ambanis. Similarly, on NDTV or IANS, you should not expect any criticism of Mr. Adani. So this is the way in which the media has changed in the recent past. Some of these changes have been taking place earlier. Corporatization of the media, the politicization of the media, these are not new. They've been happening over several decades. But we see these phenomena accelerating in pace and gaining ground, intensifying and becoming more entrenched.